overarching goal really is for us to move towards a creative economy in which no need to define what the creative industries are anymore, because it would be inherent to every industry to use creativity and to value creativity.
Creativity is such a fluid, moving, living thing that is the whole point of creativity. I mean, it is constantly being created.
It's so part of the fabric of Philippine culture. We are the most creative. We always like to think of ourselves as creative. Every Filipino is creative.
Nasaan na ba tayo sa bill? I mean, what if you can you situate us on that, Cong?
Yeah, so thanks. So the bill was already passed on third and final reading in the lower house months ago. Tagal na. And we'd been waiting for the Senate to act on the measure. But then we've been coordinating with our counterparts very closely, and of course through the help of Creative Industries Philippines. And we were wonderfully surprised that just a few days ago, Senator Coco Pimentel delivered his sponsorship speech for the
I saw that.
Yes. So meaning it had already been committed to the plenary. After the sponsorship speech, there will be some clarificatory questions from the other senators. And it was so nice to hear like a lot of our colleagues from the Senate expressing their desire to co-author and co-sponsor the bill.
Pero bang amendments na nangyari dun sa original bill that
they adopted the House version. So meaning to say, whatever it is that we worked on, they already reflected that in their committee report. So it's essentially the same version that's going out into the plenary for sponsorship and debate.
Okay.
So I think we're in good standing, Emily. We have 34 session days to go. That across December, and after elections also there's 3 weeks worth of sessions before Congress ends on June 30. So I think it's on track into becoming law in this Congress. So let's hope and pray.
We hope. So again, review nga natin, ano nga yung top 3 things na kailangan nating maitulak dito sa Creative Industries Bill mo, Cong?
Nako, top 3 lang. Hirap naman nun. Sige. Woo! Okay. The first is, kailangan ma-define muna kung ano yung mga creative industries. Kasi you cannot grow what you don't know, diba? So that's one. 2, it will finally create a government agency na tututok sa creative industries na ating bansa. And that will be the Philippine Creative Industry Development Council. And then yung council na yan, they have their set of roles and responsibilities na kailangan nilang i-fulfill. And yung council na yan will be both private and public. So public, andyan yung mga government agencies like DTI and DOT, and DepEd, IPOPhil, etc. And then sa private naman, we make sure that each of the strategic developmental domains that we have identified in the bill will be represented in the council, which has a say basically in the policies that will be implemented and the programs that will be created as a result. And siguro, third is yung plan. Kailangan magkaroon ng creative industry development plan for each of the creative industries that have been identified. And this plan should be discussing key action steps that need to be undertaken in the short, medium, and long term. Para kumbaga may pinatutunguhan yung creative industries natin. Kasi baka naman gawa tayo ng gawa, hindi naman na-hit natin yung ating KRA or KPIs. Ano ba yung mga KPIs or key performance indicators na yun? Number 1, yung revenue. Magkano ba yung kinikita? Pangalawa, yung jobs. Ilang trabaho ba yung na-generate nitong mga activities na to? 3 is yung contribution sa ating GDP. Kasi dapat nami-measure natin yung value na dinadala ng mga activities na to sa ating ekonomiya. Fourth, yung creation or expansion ng ating mga market. Lumalaki ba yung market outside of, Metro Manila na historically enjoys like the concentration of the market opportunities for the creative industries? Are we able to develop regional markets? How can we decentralize the creative industries from being Metro Manila based into having presence in the regions? And then another KPI in that plan is yung export. Diba? Are we able to export our creative services and even our creative goods? What policies do we need to institute to be able to address these pain points in the overall value chain of these creative industries? And then finally, another KPI is yung intellectual property. Are we generating new intellectual property? And are we able to syndicate the intellectual property, develop it such that, a comic book like Trece can really achieve the full range of its intellectual property expressions? Can it be an app? Diba? Can it be a play? Diba? Can it be its own fashion line? Can it be a theme park altogether? Diba? Parang there's so many possibilities kasi for intellectual property syndication and expansion. So that's something na kailangan ma-identify natin as part of the creative industry development plan. And I would say those three are the main takeaways from the bill.
So all of these different artists of different genres and persuasions and practices, so they all are part of the creative industries?
Yeah, they are.
What would the delineations, definitions are like? I mean, anyone can say, like, I think we've had this conversation before. I'm not going to pretend we haven't. Like, I don't think cooking is a creative industry.
Well, in the framework as discussed in the bill,
it is creative, but I don't want. Let me qualify it. I don't think I know they're creatives, but I don't think it should be part of the creative industries just because I think they already have enough in law under other industries under other legislation.
Well, I think that's sort of like an ongoing discussion. That's why it's so important to roadmap the gastronomy sector, because even it's just so broad, and there are a lot of aspects of that industry that fall under food manufacturing, for example, which is already covered by manufacturing as like its industry. And it was only with a push of Indonesia and their inclusion of gastronomy in their creative industry framework that sort of inspired us to make a push for this. Of course, we'd already been working with Chef John Melchor and his gastronomy movement, and then you have the slow food movement. Of course, we had already been working with them on some cultural legislation, but then the fact that we are part of the creative industry framework as already being spearheaded by a fellow ASEAN country, it's something sort of like a discussion still that needs to be had, and the details really need to be ironed out as to who's included and who's not included. But then I think that's the thing with creative industries. It's sort of like it ties into so many different segments of our economy.
Yeah.
And that's why the overarching goal really is for us to move towards a creative economy in which there's no need to define what the creative industries are anymore, because it would be inherent to every industry to use creativity and to value creativity.
Tita Emily's been at the forefront of this movement for many years. So I guess maybe it's best to ask all Emily's view on I guess since we asked the gastronomy and the creative industries.
Yeah, I mean, but they're called culinary arts after all. And one's a culinary artist, shall we say, a chef who does certain things that are out of the usual. Say they create a show. So then may video na, may program na. That becomes, that brings him into the stream of creative industry, hindi ba? But then here we are also. I mean, recently there was all this talk about adobo. You remember that? You remember that, trying to find the adobo recipe. You'll never pinpoint that as because precisely, I mean, creativity is such a fluid moving, living thing, that is the whole point of creativity. I mean, it is constantly being created. So there's always something new, something evolving, something, talagang mahirap ipin down. But you know it when you see it. You kind of know it when you see something original or something that just opens your mind in a different way. You are in touch with a creative product. We often say, I mean, I was with the CCP for such a long time, and we always say we are the most creative people in Asia, di ba? Pero parang nahuli naman tayo dun sa proclaiming it, I guess.
Well, it's interesting because I attended webinar yesterday organized by the ASEAN Foundation. No, I was one of the panelists representing the Philippines, and then the others were from Brunei, from Singapore, from Laos, and sila parang merong creative industry government agency somehow. Pero syempre iba-ibang iterations. Pero bottom line is meron silang sarili nilang government agency na tumututok dun sa creative industries. Tapos tayo, meron naman kahit papaano, pero very siloed yung approach, and it only covers like maybe one aspect of the creative industries. Like for example, you have the National Book Development Board just for books, diba? Or you have Film Development Council just for films. Pero as we have identified in the creative industry framework, it's very broad. In fact, there are at least 50 creative industries already that we've identified that will be receiving the kind of support that is being proposed in the bill. And so kailangan talaga natin ng isang overarching na government body that will be enjoined to really develop this particular sector na alam naman natin contributes a lot, quite significantly actually, to our economy. So are we late to the party? Sure we are. But I think in terms of government supporting, pero alam naman natin yung creatives natin sa bansa have already been achieving so much even before the conversation in this creative industry started.
Does it all come together? Doesn't it all come together in the NCCA? That's the only parang overarching institution that we have.
So with NCCA, they're primarily tasked to be able to tackle yung cultural discrimination. So it's being able to get as much, cultural output out there for the people to be able to consume, regardless of whether or not it's economically viable.
Yes,
so
you're right.
NCCA is not really the business na dapat kumikita yung mga works, 'di ba? Kunwari, meron silang endowment fund, 'di ba? They can provide grants to those who will apply. But creative industry policy kasi is totally different because yun nga, it's still very industry based. So there are key results areas and key performance indicators that need to be met, such as yun nga, revenue, how many jobs are being created, contribution to GDP. So iba rin kasi yung KPIs ng creative industry policy, which NCCA, and rightfully so, should not bother themselves with. Kasi yun nga, parang kailangan rin naman talaga na meron tayong government agency na nakatutok sa cultural policy, na may mga output yung cultural sector na hindi mo pwedeng i-subject into the same metrics na kumikita ba yan? Kung hindi yan kumikita, wag natin supportahan. Hindi pwedeng ganun. Kasi maraming benefits na intangible din na nagagawa yung presence ng output na ganun. And that's just one of many mga aspects of culture in which nagda-diverge siya into creative industry policy. Like, for example, heritage, for example, is very much anchored in the past. And it is a non-renewable resource. That's why it has to be preserved. And then creativity naman, gaya nga nung sabi ng mga experts natin, is the ultimate renewable resource. And it's very future-centric. And so both creativity and future occupy in the present, and then they really have to negotiate with each other on like which ones need to be left intact and which ones need to be put under the lens of this creative industry policy so that you can move it forward into the digital future.
Yes.
Emily, you said that you mentioned that we were late to the party. Why do you think that is?
Kasi parang sikat na yung Korean telenovelas and parang the others have found a niche for some time already, for some years. Hindi ba? Tapos, eto tayo, we supply a lot actually. Pero hindi tayo, we're not known for any specific art form. So, I throw the question back to you. If we were to look for our niche, niche, what would that be?
Well, ako, if I may, parang, di ba, based dun sa UNCTAD report, number 1 ang Philippines in terms of the export of our creative services. But we are number 5 in terms of the export of our creative goods. And overall, we're number 5 in ASEAN in terms of the export of our creative output, aggregating both products and services. And of course, we've already identified kung bakit nga ba tayo lagging behind in terms of the export of our creative goods. So, issues on logistics, issues on, of course, yung sa manufacturing side ng creative industries, mahal yung kuryente, kulang sa mga investments na pumapasok because of limitations on foreign ownership. Siyempre, kilala yung furniture, yung fashion sector natin, dun sa creating mga artisanal, one-of-a-kind pieces. Pero in terms of like mass production, yun yung medyo hindi natin kaya, just like yung China. And so, I think, bottom line, okay tayo sa export nga ng creative services natin. And it's not surprising, kumbaga, because very service-oriented ang Pinoy. In fact, the Filipino hospitality and the Filipino brand of service is really just something to behold. And in fact, we are known for it, especially in our tourism sector, di ba? Kakaiba talaga yung warmth na binibigay ng Pilipino sa mga turista, sa mga foreigner, kumbaga. Pero I think ang kailangan nga natin ngayon is paano ba tayo makakapag-develop na ng ating sariling intellectual property na kung saan mas makikilala yung ating bansa na magiging talagang distinctly Filipino. So obviously, nakita na natin yung 13, what it was able to do, diba, for representing the country in the global stage of Netflix. And we need more Filipino intellectual property, sort of representing the country. Because as we realized with the Korean wave, investing in our creative economy is able to do so much and yield so much for a country in terms of like its soft power, in terms of the kind of attention and even respect and admiration that it gets from our neighbors, and then also what it's able to bring to the economy in terms of tourism, and then in terms of investments in the country. And so I guess yun nga, we are late to the party in that aspect. Ang dami ng kumbaga naka-escape sa atin because hindi natin sila prioritize or hindi natin sila pinagtuunan ng pansin. I mean, case in point na nga lang, yung ilang-ilang, di ba? Na endemic sa atin. Parang kinuha ng Chanel, yun na yung naging sangkap ng Chanel number 5. Tapos, meron din tayong technology na dinevelop, yung Pinya Tex, which is like a vegan leather, but it was patented abroad, diba? And of course, ERWIN can share the case of 13 and how, it was animated abroad for whatever reason or co-produced by, a foreign entity. So parang maybe we do recognize its value, but we don't recognize it enough to want to invest in it.
Why don't we? I mean, that's an interesting question, diba? I mean, yeah, we are somewhat late compared to our neighbors. Emily mentioned earlier that this is good for legislation to talk about in Congress because it's so familiar, it's so part of the everyday, it's so part of the fabric of Philippine culture. We are the most creative. We always like to think of ourselves as creative. Every Filipino is creative. That's why we don't give it enough importance. Is that it?
Puro, we take it for granted, no? Because it's just there. I mean, like, there is somebody who can belt Regine Velasquez-esque notes in every corner, diba? In every street corner archipelago. I mean, there's
kahit hindi nila kaya gagawin nila eh.
And kahit hindi nila kaya gagawin pa nila.
Oops!
So maraming talented at marami din talent no. Pero nila.
Well, pero ito palagi ko naririnig ito no sa mga legislators, sasabihin mo, paghihingi ka ng mas malaking budget o kaya pagtuunan natin ito ng pansin. Art, ano ba yan? Di naman nakakain yan. So it ends up with that, it's an abstract thing that, and they leave it there. So this one hopes to make that abstract thing real in terms of this can earn, this can help improve the status of the starving artist. Ang dami niyan dito sa Pilipinas, starving artists.
I think it goes back to the understanding of policymakers as to how they can support art or they can support the creative sector. They understand support for the creative sector as patronage, meaning to say, how do I support artists? By getting them for my event, by buying their work, which is absolutely essential and it's totally okay. Pero from the point of view of the policymaker, there's more kasi to it than patronage. Parang you need to be able to dedicate time into discussing all of these issues that are plaguing each and every area and segment of our creative industries. Grabe, the hearings that we have in Congress, every time we launch an inquiry, we just finished fashion, we finished visual arts, we're about to start furniture and esports. Grabe, our hearings last for like 6 to 8 hours. Per session, times 3, times 4. So, nagpo 40 hours in total yan. Kasi ang daming mga problema na hindi nasusundan. And these are problems or bottlenecks or even pain points in advertising speak, diba? That need to be addressed. Or else, parang their productivity is not going to be at its optimum state, diba? Like, for example, siguro film. Hindi pa kami nag-hearing sa film pero alam ko na yung
yan. Isa pa yan, di ba? Pero ang dami nating awards. Ang dami nating awards, hindi ba? I mean, we are among the most awarded.
Yes. Oh, okay. So, all right. The thing with film, for example, is something that Korea had figured out and that we hadn't is the kind of investment that you need to make in film, so that we can get to the point where K-drama and the parasites of the world is able to do for South Korea. Like, for example, if we want to make a successful bid for a best international film in the Oscars or even best film altogether, kind of like what Parasite was able to do. Grabe the amount of money that the Korean government had to spend on campaigning for this film to be considered by the Oscars. The ads that you need to place on Variety, on the New York Times, the kind of junkets that you need to spend on for the jurors to be able to go to South Korea to experience the culture and also do all of the marketing stuff that Parasite set off to do. Parang all of that requires significant investment. And of course, that's just in terms of like winning the award, and which is sort of like a way to legitimize the film industry, the content industry of South Korea, so that what happens, ano yung mga positive ripple effect or multiplier effect niyan? Well, of course, you have Netflix na allocating a significant chunk of their budget for original content to South Korea. And that yields to more jobs, revenue, more opportunity. But of course, this is just one side of the conversation and investment on film, because another investment that needs to be made is on our film incentives. Because, like, for example, yung FDCP or yung Film Development Council, they have programs like yung Flip, yung Create PH, where they incentivize foreign producers to shoot in the Philippines, knowing full well that these investments will yield into significant returns for our local economy. Based on our assessment of the data and some of the studies made by the FDCP so far, the ROI of every peso you spend on a film incentive is 1:8. Meaning to say, kung 100 pesos yung gagastusin ng gobyerno for a film incentive, yung 100 pesos na yun mag-yield into 800 pesos worth of investment sa bansa. So it's not a losing proposition at all. In fact,
it's not. Yeah. So it's important that also our legislators become familiar with this and realize this. No?
It's an investment. It has an ROI of 1:8. Pero bakit ang baba ng budget na binibigay
Oo
dun
nga.
sa film incentive program ng FDCP? Medyo malungkot na hindi nare-realize ng karamihan sa mga policymakers natin na hindi pabigat ang creative industry.
Oh, it's an
Actually,
investment. Oo. So nga,
investment nga yan,
importante nga, oo, correct.
and that's just film.
Yeah.
At hindi pa kami nag-inquiry into film. So, hindi pa kami nakapag-deep dive into all of the problems. Pero to recent memory, nakapag-deep dive kami sa visual arts. And like sa visual arts pa lang, for example, problems are dime a dozen. One is lack of institutional support for visual artists to be able to thrive, whether it's local government or all the way it's a national government. So national government, yung pinaka-immediate is of course NCCA, diba? They're able to provide that support. Pero because of like the systems in place, parang it becomes a matter of reimbursement of your expenses rather than an outright grant that you can give to the entity that's maybe producing some kind of exhibit or some kind of art fair. So yun pa lang that needs to change.
So it's been mentioned that but our counterparts, again, I reiterate the statement that the Filipino is one of the most creative people and cultures in the world. But Southeast Asia and our neighbors like Korea have already what distinguishes the Filipino? Kasi that's an interesting thing to figure out as well, right?
Well, I do remember the animation sector sharing with me during our initial consultation that what separates our animation apart from the animation being done by other countries is the expressiveness of the output of the Filipino animator. Parang kuwang-kuha daw natin yung facial expressions na hindi nakukuha nung ibang mga bansa. And to me, parang that made so much sense. And parang I heard it, I was very amused by it. Parang it was like a light bulb moment, but also parang somehow I knew it na rin in my heart na of course, the Filipinos would excel in the expressiveness of, the output of the animation sector. Kasi we're a very expressive race, diba? And so you have those mga comparative advantages that are unique. Filipino Creative, we haven't been able to deep dive into the other industries as well in terms of their comparative advantages, but certainly there are. Like definitely in the furniture and the fashion sector, yung artisanal output ng ating mga artisans ay talagang top-notch. And yun nga yung advantage natin. Kaya nga medyo sa mass market, hindi tayo masyadong nag-excel. Mass production. Kasi parang the time that goes into
scene and, diba?
Super nice bags, furniture, the ones that Kenneth are making, the Cebu furniture makers, the Pampanga furniture makers. Parang it's so detailed and intricate, diba? And so, merong mga advantages ang Filipino Creative. Hindi pa lang siya masyadong, kumbaga, there haven't been any opportunities to be able to identify that other than being an insider and knowing that because you somehow have realized that for yourself based on your dealings with clients and with your colleagues. So that's, dyan pumapasok yung road mapping. It's important na each industry is able to roadmap on the short, medium, and long term. And kasama dun sa strategic planning for the development of the creative industries is a SWOT analysis. And also being able to identify ano ba yung strengths and weaknesses, and of course, opportunities and threats ng bawat creative industry natin. Like sa animation, okay, strength natin, magaling tayo sa facial expressions. Kaya kahit na maaring mas economically viable na mag-outsource sa ibang bansa, sa atin pa rin pupunta because yun nga, hindi kaya ng animators ng iba yung ginagawa ng animators ng Pilipinas. So, importante nga malaman kung ano-ano yung mga advantages na yun para yun yung pwede nating ma-harness at ma-develop.
Well, proof of our creative prowess or potential are all the awards na nagugulat na lang tayo. Siya, Filipino pala gumawa ng music nun. Filipino pala nag-animate nun. Filipino. Every time, some award is given and the roll call comes out on who were the people who worked on it, no? It's always a very pleasant surprise na we didn't even know that we had so many Filipinos. Animators lang natin, and they work in foreign big companies, no? It would be so wonderful when we have a thriving creative economy where Filipinos can find their place in it, and we can be known for that kind of output.
Emily, when you were head of the CCP, were you still running the agency?
Well, I had retired, but I was asked back as a consultant at the time.
Okay, and TOFF, were you still running your theater company when you were in Congress?
No, I took a hiatus first 2 years, and then after I had been burned by my time in
Oh my
Congress,
Lord.
that's when I decided to revive a theater company kasi parang it was an outlet to be creative and to
That's what kept you
get away.
sane.
So I was doing it at the same time for about 2 years or 1.5 years prior to the pandemic hitting, and then now totally no theater.
How about you, Erwin?
Oh no, I'm not in government, so yeah.
No, you're not. I mean, but being chair of the CCP is not a full-time thing. It's how to call it? Well, it's a policy-making body, but it doesn't require us to be there constantly. It's not like TOFF. And talagang that's really his work. So I'm glad you recognize that the theater was your sanity holder, shall we say? So how easy or how difficult, for example, a theater? How do you make that more lucrative for everyone?
Okay, well, you know what? If you assess the German model or the whole European model for theater, for that matter, like a huge chunk of their revenue comes from institutional support. Like maybe 50%, 60% comes from institutional support, and then you have maybe 10 to 15% of the revenue coming from other areas like parking or concessionaires or whatever, and only like 5 to 10% comes from ticket sales.
Wow.
Pero dito, to be able to do a theater production here, it's like 100% ticket sales.
But here it never runs for that long. I mean, it never runs for long enough because the costs, I guess, are enormous. I mean,
exactly. So, and it's also the market, diba? Parang habang dumadami yung players, hindi naman ata nag-expand or nag-increase din yung market. So that's also one of the goals of the creative industry policy that we're forwarding. Kailangan ma-develop natin yung local markets at ma-expand din siya. Kasi the reason why the Korean wave is so developed and it's so ubiquitous almost, it's global, they are definitely dominating the cultural space, is because their biggest consumers are the Koreans themselves. And that's something that we cannot take for granted. And the fact that Filipinos need to be the biggest consumers of our own creative output and content.
So pwede ba natin may mandate na we should all watch Filipino theater if you're age 18 to dapat mandated by law under penalty of death?
Grabe. Okay.
Medyo drastic yata yung iniisip mo.
Medyo drastic. Pero yun nga I mean, kaya nga kailangan natin kailangan mag-institute muna ng policies to be able to get it to a certain point until it matures. Like, for example, we had very heated debates dun sa music industry development bill that we filed, and it had already passed that committee in which it was referred to, but it hasn't progressed as much. But one of the salient features of that bill is to institutionalize music quotas. And while music quotas are already in existence because of an executive order that was passed during the time of Cory Aquino, hindi siya na-implement ng tama. It says that dapat 4 songs are being played on the hour in all broadcast entities. And so we were trying to institutionalize music quotas, pero we were veering away from the number of songs to percentage na lang, kasi some songs may be longer or shorter than others. So we were pushing for a percentage in which there's an additional percentage for new songs. Kasi gusto naman natin mabigyan din ng opportunities yung mga baguhang musikero na marinig yung kanilang mga works sa broadcast. And of course, it was being opposed by the broadcast sector Pero siguro the win-win here is that we are institutionalizing a music quota, but we give some kind of flexibility to be able to decrease it and then eventually remove it altogether, assuming na talagang ma-develop na yung market for OPM. So, yun nga kailangan rin talagang mag-institute ng mga policies kasi kailangan mo din talaga
To kickstart it, no?
kailangan mong i-stimulate at i-start yung kind of future na nai-imagine mo through essentially these instrumentalities. So we'll see. Pero yeah, I mean, I think very interesting din sa publishing sector, for example. Alam naman natin 'di ba na yung magazine industry medyo nag-collapse na dito sa bansa. I mean, I was fortunate to have worked in the magazine industry when it was still very much vibrant and there were titles that were coming out every month.
Yeah.
And then there was a battle on who had the best cover, whether it was Esquire of ERWIN or Rogue or even Chalk magazine where I was working once upon a time, or all the fashion magazines like Preview and Mega. As in talagang, wow, ang daming titles. And then slowly but surely, isa-isa sila nagsara.
Nawala.
Nawala. Because of a host of different reasons and problems that in hindsight, which is diba, always 2020, I can't help but imagine that had the publishing sector worked more closely with government to address these problems, might we have been able to prevent the collapse. And then I thought, maybe it's a global thing. Maybe digital has really disrupted the print industry and parang it's slowly dying, and parang it is a consequence of innovation as brought about by the digital space. And then I found out that in India, the publishing sector is very much vibrant.
Yeah.
So sabi ko, why is that? Bakit sa kanila vibrant and sa atin parang not just the magazine industry but even the book publishing industry in general? Bakit parang pa ganon? It's because of a host of policies that are in place. This is a softer version of Erwin's proposition. But we have to really start them young, and dapat pa lang sa DepEd, sa K-12, talagang tinitrain na natin yung mga kabataan na magbasa ng libro. Kasi pagka-graduate nila, sila rin mismo yung magiging market for all of this output.
Yeah.
Diba?
And we've never had a reading culture talaga. Kasi mahal din ang books. Hindi ba? Pero nandun tayo sa, kung mas marami ang mag-o-order, or I guess can we legislate na for children's books, for example, that every elementary school will get one so that you're publishing a greater number and therefore the costs will go down. Mahal kasi konti ang bumibili. Diba?
And plus, diba, the tariff on paper is quite significant. So it needs to be reduced. That's where, again, government comes in.
Sa India, ang dami nilang books printed even on practically new, very rough paper, sort of like newsprint. Pero ang baba ng cost. So people can afford to buy.
Yeah, these are the things that can be addressed by working with government, actually.
I mean, I'm actually, I appreciate the point that Tita Emily made about, books are expensive. Maybe we should, and tough, we should incentivize rather than penalize people for not following. Like maybe even for the films, like maybe the theater industry, the Philippine theater should be given tax incentives for showing Filipino cinema. Probably that might be a better idea than imposing just a quota on them to do. I mean, even for music, incentivize broadcast to more Filipino, tax incentives if you use Filipino music rather than foreign, rather than impose a quota on them. But anyway, I want to ask this question actually because it touched upon, we asked, Tita Emily said nga about adobo, there's brouhaha about what is the exact ingredients of adobo. But I think it's a bigger question that maybe about what makes us Filipino, what makes any kind of art form Filipino. Because I've been asked that several times over the course of, I guess, what you might call a career. So is that something that policymakers are talking about?
Alam mo, actually, siguro pag nag-road mapping na yung mga industries, that's a question that needs to be asked. And siguro mahihirapan yung creatives themselves in answering that question. Because you know what, I do remember, I was asking Spike of Ayala Museum with regards to, Filipino art and what they can be. And then parang I had this theory na parang, is Filipino a feeling? Kasi parang, there's something about the Filipino anything, whether it's Filipino food or it's Filipino, it's a Filipino film or a Filipino song. or the Filipino in general, when you get to interact with them, meet with them, that there's this feeling that it gives you.
But
Um,
tough. Is it important for policymakers to actually define what is Filipino in terms of culture?
I don't think so. I think there needs to be a whole of society approach in answering that question. It might be dangerous if you get policymakers to define what Filipino
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. And people are always, di ba, we're also, you're right. but beyond that, I mean, we're such a sponge for everything that's
Mm.
happening globally. Parang we're always first adopters of all sorts of things, no? And then it
Mm-mm.
becomes folded into our everyday. So parang ang hirap himayin. It's like I always say this in advertising. I always say that's our we're halo-halo. We're like a whole bunch of, there's beans, there's sweet beans, there's fresh fruit, there's saba, there's this, there's that. It's cold. That's not naturally Filipino. But the outcome of all these things together is so wonderful. Diba? And I don't know if we need to make it himay. Maybe it's a
Yeah.
feeling.
Totally agree. Actually, it's so wonderful.
Sometimes we
halo-halo
come across stuff. Sometimes we come across stuff kasi na, pustahan tayo, Filipino ang may gawa niyan eh. Di ba? Parang you get this strong, why? Why? What makes you say that? Kasi it's a little bit kenko and it's folksy but it's always, generally, it's always lighthearted. That's part of who we are. Tapos naiinggit tayo sa ibang bansa. For example, Thailand. We always say, bakit sila parang napaka-distinct ng culture nila. And I always ask, well, what makes it distinct? What? The temples? What? The food is fresh, yes. But what makes it so happy? What makes you know you're there?
You know what's interesting about Thailand, and this is something we discovered in our hearings on gastronomy. If you are a Thai national who is going to be opening a Thai restaurant overseas, you will get support from the government.
Really, huh?
Yeah, because the Thai government recognizes that food is like one of their brand ambassadors, and it contributes
You're
to
right.
their soft power. So, kunyari, magbubukas ka ng Thai restaurant sa London or sa New York, you will qualify for incentives that you will receive from the government. So, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And whereas there are Filipino restaurants that are opening in different parts of the world, you have, you have Romulo Cafe, in London, and then you have Jeepney, these restaurants in New York, and wala, sa reading sikap, they don't get anything.
Yeah.
So, diba,
That's something to look forward to.
Parang nakakatuwa kasi parang there's so much that we can do talaga for the creative sector. If they got that kind of support, imagine how we can accelerate towards that creative future that we imagine. And that's really the role of government, to be able to provide an enabling environment for creatives to thrive. And that's exactly what we want to be able to accomplish through all these measures that we are, really fighting so hard for, and sleepless nights and just consulting with absolutely everyone, and lobbying and politicking and all of these things just to get it as far along in the legislative mill as possible. Pero tayo sa creative sector, nakikita na natin yung future na yun. Like, damang-daba. Like, I can feel it in my bones. That's why talagang go. We have to push.
So exciting, no? To just imagine it. It really is. Both liberating and incredibly exciting.
Best of luck.
I just want to want to say thanks. Thanks, Cong, for this not just for this conversation, but for this yeoman's job you've done in terms of pushing and gently, being so consistent with moving this creative industries bill along. We owe you a big
thank you. I think we owe it to the sector, really, and that's what keeps me going. And I'm a stakeholder too. I mean, how many?
Yes.
I've been in publishing for 13 years, longer even for my time in the theater. And gosh, the things that I've had to deal with, it's mind-boggling, no? And and as I've discovered with all these other sectors, my gosh, ang dami nilang hugot, ang dami nilang mga shoulda, woulda, coulda. Parang if we only got this support, we might have been able to do this and that. So it's high time that we finally give the creative sector the kind of attention that it deserves.
Yeah.
So what can viewers of this show do for all your initiatives?
I think it's to constantly put the creative industries in sort of like the headspace of your immediate community. And then, of course, if you take to social media, it sort of contributes to some kind of collective consciousness on how we can better prioritize and support the sector. We are also approaching 2022 election. So something that we've realized in our 1.5 years of really fighting for this advocacy is you really need to have a leadership that sees its value and its importance, so much so that they will invest the necessary time and resources to be able to get it done. Our creative future is largely influenced by the kind of leadership that we'll have. And if we will have a president in the next 6 years who is very much supportive of the creative industries, the more we'll be able to accelerate towards achieving that creative future. So I hope that's something that our creatives who are listening to this program right now can take into consideration. We need leaders who are supportive of our sector because this is a legitimate sector. It's a sector that is in need of a lot of support, and so many of our neighbors are already enjoying and reaping the benefits of decisive and intentional policy shifts on the part of their government. Korea is a consequence of an intentional policy shift, so we need to be able to enjoy the same for our country.
Yeah.
And of course, with the help of everybody listening to this program.
Well, you got my
Fabulous.
vote.
Yeah.
You got my vote.
Yes. And it's really, I mean, it's an industry whose time has come.
What's Emily? What's the saying? Ano yung saying?
Yeah.
There's nothing more powerful than an idea.
Time has come.
Time has come.
Yeah.
Tama ba yun, Erwin?
Yeah, tama yan.
Di ba may yamang dagat?
Di ba may yamang lupa?
Yamang gubat, yamang linang.
Di ba may yamang likha?
Yung mga gawang niluwal ng utak na mataba.
Orig!
Pinoy astig.
Sa atin, pwedeng magmula
Kanta.
Talk.
Batok.
Aklat.
Patalastas. Serye.
13. Pelikula.
Video.
Kwento.
Invento. Hobby. Ganda.
Sa buong mundo.
Kayang umaura. O ano? Creative ka ba?
Likhain natin ang hinaharap ngayon.